Greetings dear aspirants, welcome to today's current affairs session of Civilspedia. Today we'll be discussing about Eco-Niwas Samhita project and about the CBET 2030 project under the prelims topic, and about the recent outcomes of the COP24 summit, and about India's nuclear program under the mains topic. So let's move on to our first topic of the day, the Eco-Niwas project. So Niwas is nothing but the home or the residence. Home or the residence. So this is nothing but the energy conservation building code for the residential buildings, which was launched by the Ministry of Power, and it will be implemented by the Bureau of Energy Efficiency. So this was launched very recently, which is the news of the day. So the keywords is that you need to know about this energy conservation building code for the residential buildings. So nothing but the ECBCR, and which agency implements, which is nothing but the Bureau of Energy Efficiency. So Bureau of Energy Efficiency is a statutory body which was launched as per the Energy Conservation Act of 2001 under the Ministry of Power. So it implements the policies and the programs in the area of energy efficiency and conservation. To know more about Bureau of Energy Efficiency, please refer to one of our previous classes where the other faculty discussed at large about the Bureau of Energy Efficiency. So next topic of the day is the CBET 2030 project. CBET 2030. So it is a collaborative project between the government, the Nippon Foundation of Japan, and the General Bathymetric Chart of the oceans. So it aims to bring together the bathymetric data of the entire ocean floor of the world. Because if you know, at present only select countries or individual countries have their own data, but as such a world level data is not present. So this particular project was launched in the year 2017. It was in the recent news because $3 billion have been allocated for this project to be completed by the year 2030. So you need to know something about this GEPCO, or the General Bathymetric Chart of the Oceans. So it is an international group of mapping experts who will develop a range of bathymetric data sets and data products. So this particular GEPCO operates under the auspices of the International Hydrographic Organization and UNESCO's Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission. So when you study about such international organizations, please have it in mind to know if India is a member of that particular organization or not. In case of the International Hydrographic Organization, which sets the standards for the measurements related to ocean and ocean products, India is a member. And also in the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission, India is one of the founding members. So please have this idea in mind when you prepare for prelims point of view. So let's move on to our next topic of the day, the COP24 summit. So three major issues were discussed under this COP24 summit, which was held at Katowice, Poland. So the first major issue is to come up with a rule book for the Paris Agreement. Second thing is the conclusion of the 2018 the facilitative dialogue, or also called as the Talanoa dialogue. And the third issue is the stocktake of the pre-2020 commitments with regards to its implementation and ambition by the member nations. And other issues were also discussed. First thing is this IPCC report on 1.5 degrees Celsius, which was discussed at large in one of our previous Civilspedia classes. Please have a look at it. Because majority of the countries welcome this particular report, but few countries like USA, Russia, Kuwait and Saudi Arabia did not welcome the report. They simply noted the report. So this was the news. And the COP has also decided that the adaptation fund, which was signed under the Kyoto Protocol, shall continue under the Paris Agreement. So these were two other issues which were discussed under this COP24. If you see the key aspect of this COP24, it discussed at large with related to finance, transparency and adaptation. So let's see something about the Paris Agreement, what it says. First thing is to keep the warming well below 2 degrees Celsius, if possible to limit it by 1.5 degrees Celsius. And the developed countries has agreed for finance of $100 billion per year starting 2020. And based on the principle of differentiation. So there will be different sets of principles for the developing nations and the developed nations. And the emission objectives, burden sharing, review mechanism, etc. So this particular COP24 summit, which finalized the rule book, discussed at large about the finance, the emission objectives and the review mechanism. So let us see that in detail. So the first issue is the finalization of the guidelines, modalities or the rules for the implementation of the Paris Agreement. So under this, there are 4 topics that you need to know. First thing, under this particular rule book, a biennial report or a report once in every 2 years would be released by the member nations starting 2024. And this would be in a common format. Let us see in the latest slides what common format means. And second thing is the rules for the global stocktake of emissions starting 2023 has also been framed. So if you see here, one thing is the review mechanism, which will start from 2023. So rule book has been framed. And third thing is the setting up of an expert compliance committee to monitor all those pledges given by the member nations. And one more topic was discussed, which is nothing but the voluntary market mechanism, that is the carbon trading. So this has not been agreed in this particular COP24 summit. This will be continued in the next summit onwards. So you need to know about these three. So just have this in mind, because in prelims point of view, you can get the statements directly. So first thing is the Paris Agreement rulebook. So we all know about the intended nationally determined contributions, which are voluntary in nature and which will be given by the member nations. So the first agreed thing is to have a common reporting rules for easier comparison. Because if you see, everybody intends to reduce the emission of their particular countries. If you see countries such as India or China, they mention it with emission intensity by the GDP. And if you see countries such as USA or the EU, they report it in form of absolute emissions. So we will not be able to compare this data at a global level. So a common reporting rule has been sought. And second thing is the common time frame for pledges starting 2031. If you see countries like India, we have got some 5-year targets, we have got some 10-year targets. And if you see USA in particular, especially with regards to the absolute emissions, it has given its target by till 2025. So there is some discrepancies in the final year of the data. So starting 2031, there will be a common time frame for that. And third thing is the recording of the pledges in the public registry. Especially they have started an interim online portal. So this will bring in transparency to this mechanism. And the final thing is the climate finance, where the developed countries have agreed to support the developed nations have agreed to support the developing countries. So the rules have been made flexible here. This is one drawback here, because initially only the grants given to the developing countries by the developed nations would be counted. But now even the loans are being taken into account. So this will dilute the overall support that is being given by the developed nations towards the developing nations. And the second thing under this COP rulebook agreement is that the rules for the stock taking process has been devised. First thing, it involves the information collection and the technical assessment and the consideration of outputs by this UNFCCC body. Under the information, what are the information that would be collected are the progress in cutting emissions by the member nations, adapting to climate change, providing, receiving climate finance, and loss and damage, which was a new thing due to the climate impacts. So all these small island developing states, or also called as SIDS, will be largely benefited with the help of this loss and damage clause, because due to sudden climatic events, even a portion of their particular country is also lost. So this clause will help these SIDS nations. And finally, it's the expert compliance committee. So expert compliance committee has been decided to be formed to monitor all those Paris Agreement compliances by the individual nations. So this particular compliance committee will be facilitative in nature, and it won't be a non-adversarial or non-punitive in nature. So if they are going to give some penalties for the member nations, it is most likely that that country might withdraw from the Paris Agreement. So it will remain non-adversarial and non-punitive in nature. So the second issue under this COP24, which was discussed, is the conclusion of the 2018 facilitative dialogue, also called the Talanoa dialogue. So before Paris climate agreement to come in place by the year 2020, we have got our own NDCs. Each member nations has got its own NDCs which they have to comply before the 2020. So this was agreed in the year 2015. And this has to be completed by the year 2020. So there will be a mid stock taking in the year 2018. To facilitate this dialogue was created. Hence it is called as a facilitative dialogue, or also the Talanoa dialogue, because the previous COP23 summit had the Fiji presidency. So Talanoa is like sitting or a group of meeting in order to facilitate the discussions. So this is all about this. But the final text which came under this COP24 agreement is to invite the countries to consider the outcomes of the Talanoa dialogue in preparing their NDCs and in efforts to enhance their pre-2020 ambition. If you see the previous COP24 summits, it was always pinpointing, either the developed nations pinpointing the developing nations such as India or China, or the developing nations pinpointing the developing nations for releasing more amount of the greenhouse gases. But this time everybody was in unison that climate change is a big issue and it has to be dealt in a collaborative manner. So this dialogue facilitated that, and hence it managed to introduce a positive spirit into the negotiations. So the third issue which was discussed in the COP24 is the stocktake of the pre-2020 commitments with regards to its implementation and ambition. So a stock take is generally necessary because it will give some amount of accountancy to the developed nations and also to the developing nations. If you see the Kyoto Protocol, the outcome text pushes for the developed countries who haven't yet done to ratify the Doha Agreement. So Kyoto Protocol is about the release of the greenhouse gas emissions that has to be contained by the member nations which are parties to the Kyoto Protocol. So this first commitment was from the year 2008 to 2012, and second commitment was made for the year 2012 to 2020. Those countries which were members to the first commitment of the Kyoto Protocol were not members to the commitment of the second commitment of the Kyoto Protocol. So this particular COP24 summit has pushed for these countries to go with the Doha Amendment. And second thing is the Green Climate Fund, which was released in the COP summit held at Cancun in the year 2010. So it strongly urges the developed nations to increase their financial support in line with the promise, because post 2020 also $100 billion support will be given by the developed countries. Before 2020, the developed nations have agreed to give $100 billion every year in order to support the developing nations. But as such, if you see, with the help of the stock taking exercise, the developed nations, like only around half of the committed amount has been given in the year 2017, which is not a welcome step. So this particular summit has urged for the developing countries to improve their financial commitments to the poorer countries. So the COP has welcomed the 2018 stock take of the pre-2020 implementation to reiterate its decision to convene another stock take next year. So next year also the stock take would happen. If you see here the Kyoto Protocol and the Green Climate Fund, it is almost to end by the year 2020. Nothing major has been done by the developing nations, developed nations towards the developing nation. So this is more likely kind of a failure. So, but overall, if you see in the COP24, India's interest has been protected. First thing is the recognition of different starting points for the developing nations and the developed nations, and giving more flexibilities for developing countries in order to combat the pollution or in order to combat the climate change with the help of the transparency clause, and consideration of principles of the developing countries including India, which involves principles like equity. Next principle is the common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities, etc. So India was able to manage all its key interests, and hence India has told that COP24 was a great success. With COP24, there were 3 declarations signed by some of the member nations with Poland as the chair, because this year Poland is the presidency. First thing is the Silesia Declaration, where 50 countries are the signatories. So this declaration is about the need for emission reducing policies to ensure a just transition of a workforce. So when you're reducing the emissions, you're more likely to move towards greener technologies. For all those workforce who work in the fossil fuel industries, when they are moving to this green technologies, they're more likely to lose their jobs. So this needs to be taken care. For that, this particular declaration came. Second thing is the forest for the climate declaration. So importance of forest was seen in reaching the Paris Agreement goals, because overall Poland has increased its climate forest cover. And third thing is the partnership for the electromobility and zero emission transport, which was jointly signed together by the Poland and UK in order to bring towards an e-mobility revolution. And 38 countries were signatories. If you see in all these 3 declarations, India was not a signatory, or India did not sign any of these declarations. So this is not of much importance when you see from prelims point of view. So there were some questions in 2016 when the 2015 Paris Agreement came into place. Around 10 questions were there directly or indirectly in the year 2016, and 3 were direct questions with regards to the Paris Agreement. The first thing is the International Solar Alliance, which was launched at this conference in 2015. Second statement is the alliance includes all the member nations of United Nations. And the next question is the intended nationally determined contribution seen in the context of the countries of the world to combat the climate change. And the third thing was in direct reference to this UNFCCC meeting held in Paris. First statement goes like: the agreement was signed by all the member countries of the UN. It will go into effect in 2017, but not It will go into effect from 2020 onwards. So this statement is correct. To limit the global warming temperatures by 2 degrees Celsius and to commit to reduce to 1.5 degrees Celsius. This is correct. And third thing is the developed countries have acknowledged the historical responsibility in global warming and committed to donate $1,000 billion. It is not 1,000, it is $100 billion. So here 2 only is the answer. In these lines, you can also expect a question in the year 2019 because 2018 COP24 summit is also quite significant because the rule book for the Paris agreement has been reached. So the first statement goes like the rule book for the Paris agreement to enter into force in 2025 has been finalized in the meeting. And the second statement is all countries have to report their emissions every 2 years starting 2023. And it has agreed to set up an expert compliance committee to monitor the climate pledges of the member nations. If you see only option 3 is correct here. You also need to know the genesis of whatever agreements that are in place. So if you see Paris agreement will come into force by the year 2020. And second thing is they have to report their emissions every 2 years starting 2024. This was something which was agreed in this particular summit. So both these statements are wrong. Please be careful with the years whenever you're going for questions like these. And the third thing is correct. It has agreed to set up an expert compliance committee. So the answer here is 3 only. So you can expect questions like these. So let's move on to our next topic, India's 3-stage nuclear program. In this topic, I intend to give an idea about the 3-stage nuclear program and where India is at present now and what are the challenges that we face. If you see nuclear power as such, it can be used for 2 purposes. First is the civil purpose and second is the military purposes. So here this particular India's 3-stage nuclear program is with regards to the civil purposes. So if you see there are 3 stages. First stage is the heavy water reactors, pressurized heavy water reactors, where natural uranium will be used as a fuel and in order to produce more plutonium. And in the stage 2, this plutonium that was produced in the stage 1 and with some more uranium will be able to produce more plutonium. So we'll have a stockpile of plutonium. So this plutonium with the help of thorium infused into the nuclear reactor, this plutonium plus thorium will give more amount of this uranium-233 material. So this uranium-233 fuel breeders are the stage 3, where thorium plus more amount of this uranium-233 produced in the stage 2 will be used to produce more energy. Right now we are largely stuck to the stage 1 for the past 50-60 years. If you see all these nuclear reactors of the country are based on this pressurized heavy water reactors only. Very recently, a prototype fast breeder reactor has been developed in Kalpakkam in Chennai. So this will be working on the stage 2, the one that's going to come up in Kalpakkam, Chennai. So the criticality will be achieved by the January of 2019. So our technology is quite limited. So you need to know what are the challenges when it comes to India's nuclear program. Before that, you just have a look at about the upcoming nuclear plans in our nation. So if you see, Kaiga wasn't recent news because for its world record of continuous operation of about 941 days. And Jaitapur plant was also in recent news because it is an India-France joint collaboration project. And once it comes, around 10,000 gigawatt of electricity will be produced from this plant alone, which will become the largest nuclear complex in the world. So what are the challenges of a nuclear power program? First thing is the high cost of installation, operation and maintenance. And second thing is the stringent nuclear safety rules, because now the world is more concerned post this Fukushima disaster which happened in Japan. And third thing is the high cost of nuclear power that has been generated. So the overall cost for producing this nuclear power is very high. Because if you see what India and other countries want to is to drift away from the carbon, have a non-carbon energy sources. So nuclear power is also a non-carbon energy source, but it is not sustainable in the long point of view. And if you also see nuclear power contribution to the total India's energy basket it's very minimal. It is just up to 3% because India is committed to have a 40% renewable energy target. This is nowhere going to help. And the non-functioning of the Indo-US civil nuclear deal, which was signed in the year 2000, which came into effect in the year 2005. So it was under the deal that the US companies would invest heavily into the nuclear power sector in India, but nothing has been materialized till now. And India is also a non-signatory to NPT. Because of this, we are not able to get the latest nuclear technologies. So these are some of the challenges of developing the India's nuclear program. And if you see, there are some government initiatives taken by the government of India. First thing is the approval of these 10 pressurized heavy water reactors of this much capacity by the Indian government, and it has also reinitiated its involvement in developing this low energy nuclear reactions. Now, whatever pressurized heavy water reactors are there, they involve high amount of temperature and pressure. But India is also working simultaneously towards this. And third thing is the technical support to the International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor Initiative by a group of nations. So India is jointly contributing to that. So these are some of the government initiatives towards the India's nuclear program. With this, we are winding up our today's topic. Please do like, comment and share the video, and please subscribe to Shankar IAS Academy channel for latest videos and updates. Stay focused and motivated, friends. Thank you.